All right. Well,
I can reiterate later down the road.
Okay. So let me do some housekeeping first and foremost. So welcome to everybody. I know we'll likely have a few folks joining here over the next few minutes, but we're really excited to have another home grain school in the grain school, and this is going to be the Liquid Colorado Grain Chain Grain School, one of the series of at least 3 sessions where we're going to be talking about drinking your grain as opposed to baking or eating your grain, right? So first and foremost, introductions for me. I'm a new face for many of you, I'm sure. I'm a new member of the Colorado Grain Chain Board, Nels Rowe, and I am the founder of Dryland Distillers in Longmont, Colorado, and a huge fan of Christopher Schooley, who we're going to be spending time with today at Troubadour Maltings. Also a huge fan of the grains that we use in our whiskeys to create truly genuine and authentic Colorado whiskeys. So we're thrilled to join you today, and we're even more excited to continue this liquid discussion over the next several grain homeschools as we go forward. Of course, today is a recorded session. So, Christopher and I have warned one another, that we have to watch our language. So we're going to be posting this on our YouTube, the Colorado Grain Chain YouTube channel here in a little bit, and it'll be available for you to review or to share with others, which we certainly encourage you to do. A few other notes. We would definitely like to highlight an upcoming event for the Colorado Grain Chain in September, on September 25th and 26th, Saturday and Sunday in particular. That's at the Pueblo Chili Festival, which is a phenomenal event. We will be there. We'll be setting up on Friday, and then we'll be doing a series of events on the Saturday and Sunday, September 25th and 26th. And of course, keep an eye for our grain school in the field up and coming in November as well. Certainly, also would like to encourage everyone, if you know folks who might be interested in Colorado grain, in the community in building community around Colorado grain, encourage them to check us out, check out the Colorado Grain Chain online, and of course memberships are genuinely appreciated. So this is our pitch to start building even further community around Colorado grain. So as we get ready to start here, we'll have the Q&A and the chat windows up and available, so feel free to chime in anytime, and we'll circle back on all those questions and answers here during the session. So without further ado, it's a warm welcome to Christopher Schooley, who started Troubadour Maltings in Fort Collins in 2014, right, Christopher? Okay, with Steve Clark as partner. I've known Christopher since at least 2017, and we hounded them to help us be one of the first to malt our the White Sonora wheat for our use in distilling. So he finally got tired of me stalking them to do some custom malting for us. But Christopher and Steve have worked for years their mission is basically to identify grain varieties that are appropriate and good for Colorado, working with growers, brewers, distillers, and the overall Colorado grain community to really identify and create and provide unique Colorado grains that are good for all of us and are the ecology around us. And he's done a great job of linking us up with other growers, including the grower of the grain that we're going to be talking about today, which is the Antero Wheat, which is the Antero malt. And that has grown, for us, it's just grown just east of our distillery in the area of Kingsburg, Colorado. And the Antero has a great story to tell because it is a true grain that has linked a lot of us together. So it's a true description of a grain chain. And Christopher is going to start us off talking about the chain of Antero today, and then we are going to follow up with talking to brewers as well as distillers and possibly even growers as we explore how a grain can not only create great products like our whiskeys and our beers, but great friendships as well. So Christopher, without any more intro, I'd like to turn it over to you if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nels, and thanks to the Grain Chain for having me for this homeschool session. really, really excited about it. We chose the name Troubadour Maltings um, because it's a troubadour is a musical storyteller. And that was something that when we were putting together this malting company out of the gate, we thought that that's what was kind of missing from this part of the supply chain from malting um, uh, through the craft beer and craft spirit supply chain was the story of malting. My background is actually I was in coffee for 20 years, predominantly roasting and importing. Um, and I worked for a number of roasters in Chicago and started a small importing house based out of Sweet Maria's um, in Oakland. And one of our primary goal with that was at the time, if you were a small roasting company in the middle of America or whatnot, if you wanted a really truly special coffee that you were paying a fair price for to the grower and ensuring that you were paying that fair price for to the grower, you would have to commit to a large quantity of that coffee and probably more than what you would be able to use in a reasonable amount of time for the shelf life of that coffee. So what we did, most of the importing houses at the time didn't have the kind of infrastructure to break down those coffees into smaller packages and distribute them in a better way. Whereas Sweet Maria's, which if you've ever looked into home coffee roasting at all, I'm sure there's a handful of folks on this call who have at least explored that a little bit. But Sweet Maria's is the primary hub of home coffee roasting. Tom Owens and Maria started that back in the late 90s, and basically has just created so much content about roasting and coffee sourcing over the years. uh, it's been a huge source of understanding coffee sourcing and coffee roasting. And we became friends. We met in Honduras in 2004 on a coffee trip and really bonded. And his whole business was about sourcing these great coffees and then breaking them down and distributing them in smaller packages to home roasters. And so, in the interest of expanding what he can purchase from specific farms to kind of strengthen those relationships, he saw an opportunity, or we both saw an opportunity talking through that to buy larger quantities and start distributing that wholesale to smaller roasters in 50 to 100-pound parcels, which meant that those small roasters could, you know, roast and distribute that coffee and have a pretty immediate ROI on that investment, which allowed them to, pay better prices all the way through the growers and whatnot. And there's transparency in all those prices and whatnot. Um, so the long story short of all that is it was about creating accessibility in that supply chain. One of the strengths, one of the main things that's happened in specialty coffee over the course of the last 30 years is that reinvestment in the supply chain and engaging with growers, engaging with processors, engaging with the mills, exporters, importers, understanding everybody's um, purpose and value add within that supply chain to ensure not just better quality across the board, but to start unlocking potential for those coffees, start better understanding what are more sustainable practices, um, both environmentally and economically. Um, so uh, it was a really, really exciting time in coffee while I was in it, in terms of the new connections that were being made and the conversations that were being had. And while I was doing that, I was also I was heavily involved in the Specialty Coffee Association, primarily the Roasters Guild. I served as on the executive council of that body and as the chair. And we were primarily a education focused organization. We developed a lot of curriculum around roasting and coffee sourcing and coffee quality and sensory testing and whatnot. And one of the things I did for the Specialty Coffee Association as a contractor is I did sensory experience design, where I set up either tastings or community building opportunities, or all the coffee services at TED Talks, but in a way that it's not just here's a cup of coffee to an attendee, but trying to open up that conversation all the way through to the consumer and engage people in a way that's not forceful, but is really like um, opening and welcoming, um, in adding little things here and there to get people interested in it. And doing all that work, all the community development kind of work, I started doing a lot of collaborations with a number of breweries in the Colorado area, a lot of, and in a couple of different states with some of our regional groups. But we started doing all of these collaborations with breweries with the goal of, for a long time, breweries have been producing beers with coffee in them, coffee stouts primarily, usually dark beers, using the coffee as a bittering element. Um, and it was all really good, and really that whole project kind of stemmed from um, that idea of those two similar businesses collaborating and helping to expose each other's audience to a new audience, the roaster's audience to the brewery and the brewery's audience to the roaster and vice versa. But the big problem with it was that most times there would be this great kind of coming together and collaboration of everybody tasting things and putting things together and coming up with recipes, and whatnot, and a lot of great engagement. But then when the final product was made, it was put up on a menu or on a tap in a tasting room and just called coffee stout. And there was no link back to, any of the work that happened in that collaboration. So there was all this effort being put into the back end of it. But then on the consumer facing side of things, there was nothing. There's nothing to get consumers tied back into it. And so we were doing a lot of work to try to figure out um, how can we change that paradigm. So, you know down the road, when you walk into a if you walked into a brewery and you saw a coffee beer on the offering list and you asked, we wanted people to ask who that roaster was, where did that coffee come from, rather than just accept it as a coffee stout. Um, and I know this sounds maybe slightly unrelated, but it really is part and parcel of the whole of our goal and what we're pushing for, which is getting folks to think about where, the ingredients of these products came from originally, and why that's important and why that's special. And so in doing all this work, it struck me, one day that, oh, well, beer is also an agricultural product. And I had family that grew barley for Coors while I was growing up here in Colorado. And so I started asking my brewing friends, what do your relationships look like with your growers? Um, and mostly received shrugs and people, kind of shaking their heads and saying, I buy it off of a website. And the more and more people I talk to, more and more people in craft beer, and this is before we really started talking to a lot of distillers as well, but more and more people in craft beer, it became really obvious that they really had no idea where things were, not just what the grain was, what the variety of barley it was, or whatnot, but where it was grown, when it was grown, and who was involved in that process. You'd maybe get a blanket statement of, I think it's from Canada or Germany or something like that. So it was clear that the supply chain in that industry looked pretty much like the supply chain looked in 30 years ago in specialty coffee, where smallholder producers were selling at a really bottom of the bin commodity price to a large processing mill, and that was getting all mixed together and sent off as generic quality commodity priced um, agricultural product. And so we saw this golden opportunity to really get involved with the supply chain and start to better understand how do we create more transparency and specialization within that supply chain. And really the crux of the whole thing was within that malting context, where you're that value add piece of, you know, taking the grain and making it accessible for the brewer or distiller. And like Mel said in the introduction about our mission statement, we really saw the opportunity to not just be a pass through, um, on many levels. One, understanding the value that we could add to the product and make it really specific and special and unique to what Troubadour could do. Not just saying this is a Colorado grown product and that's the only thing that makes it special, but that it's also malted right here and malted in small batches, and that as a small brewer or a small distiller, you have access to all these players within this supply chain. So really actively working to connect everybody and begin those conversations. So instead of not knowing where things came from, specifically where they came from, what those varieties are, why they were selected, and that it's not just serving the end user part of the supply chain, but it's also serving the grower end of that supply chain, setting up better relationships and better contracts. Again, those growers are all smallholder producers. They're all small independent businesses, just like Troubadour Malting or Dryland Distilling. Um, so if we can create a better opportunity for them, um, then it's a win across the board. And part of that win is finding varieties that are going to do really well here in Colorado, which means dryland production, really low water usage, low input usage, low profiles to and strong stock strength to reduce lodging and other problems that you might uh, occur in the field here in the wide open plains of Colorado. And so we've been really lucky with the access that we've had to various organizations to find varieties that don't just produce really great malts for us in the malt house or produce really fine spirits or beers for the end user, but are high yielding um, and great varieties for here in Colorado. And that really brings us all the way around to Antero Wheat. And so one of the things that Steve and I, my partner, discussed when we were starting that we were really excited about was that we're right here in Fort Collins, Colorado, down the road from Colorado State University, a major agricultural school, a major agricultural institution. And like many fields, medicine and education, technology, all those things, where innovation is happening is at that educational level with young minds studying things and really um, digging into various aspects of that field and learning new ways to do things better or rediscovering old ways of doing things and understanding why people went away from that and how to re-embrace the positive elements of that, i.e. character and nuance, while still being efficient and ecologically sound. And so we were really excited to be right down the road from the school. And right after we opened, pretty much right after we started producing um, in 2015, we were approached by CSU's wheat quality lab, and they were working for a number of years with the Colorado Wheat Growers Association um, on this Plains Gold project, where they were developing a number of wheat varieties to be grown in Colorado for flour production. Um, and so they came to us and they asked us if we would be able to malt some of these wheat varieties for them so that they could brew a beer for their Ag Day celebration in the fall. And so, you know, kid in the candy store kind of moment, we were given a bunch of different new varieties to play around with and figure out what might be a really great wheat to work with here in Colorado, something that was bred specifically for growing in Colorado with all the unique um, environmental challenges that poses. And so we went through a number of different varieties, both red and white wheats, primarily winter wheats here in Colorado. Um, and pretty much every wheat that we did after we malted and did hot steeps or brewed with it, it tasted kind of like pasta water because that's more or less what it was. It was, high protein wheat, um, bread for making bread. So we went through a number of these, and we were feeling kind of challenged about what we were seeing here in Colorado. Um, And then we came across one more variety to test, which was this Antero Wheat variety that they had bred there at CSU. And the Wheat Quality Lab, outside of Bird, which was named for the founder of the program there, um, all of their varieties were named after 14ers here in the state. So we came across the Antero and went through our malting schedule with it, and it was amazing. The minute the kiln finished on that batch, we opened the lid on the kiln on our old kiln system that we originally started with, and we were just hit with this super sweet aroma. It just smelled like the whole um, facility smelled like frosted flakes. It was super sweet, and we grabbed a handful and started chewing it, and it had this amazing, brilliant refined sugar sweetness to it. So we were feeling very excited about that, and we got it to a couple different breweries to play around with, and everybody was really excited. It was wheat in beer is one of those ingredients that you're using for very specific characteristics, generally some head retention and mouthfeel. And so because of the fact that it's an impact ingredient, when it was used, it had that night and day kind of element to it in the recipes. Like brewers really could see the difference between what they were using in commercial wheat versus the Antero wheat. Um, and then along those lines, we met Nels and Dryland, and we started malting some Sonora for them. Um, but we encouraged them, hey, the analysis on the Sonora looks really similar to what Antero looks like. It'd be really interesting to get some of this Antero in your hands and see if you could also distill some of this in a similar context, and it would be really cool. And so Nels over here has a jar of the Antero handy. You can kind of see. Um, so it is like compared to other brewers' wheats that are primarily from Europe. Um, it is a slightly smaller kernel size, but it's also a very uniform kernel size and does mill really well in most brewers and distillers mill systems, depending on your mill setup. If you're a distiller using a roller style mill, um, and one of the elements of that is along the pathway of working with Antero, we met Mark Arnish at Arnish Farms out in Keensburg, who Nels mentioned earlier. And Mark is a dynamo in Colorado agriculture, heavily involved in Colorado Farm Bureau and Department of Agriculture, and just a great advocate um, for farming here in Colorado and farming really intelligently and paying attention to your soil health and looking at your water usage, and has won awards for water conservation and whatnot. And so we knew he was the kind of person we wanted to work with. And primarily his business was certified seed production. So because of the fact that he's certified seed production, there's a uniformity to the grain size in the Antero that we were able to achieve, because of how he's hands he's going through and hand cleaning those fields and whatnot, to maintain their purity and what have you. But one of the other factors of all that is, I told you we found this Antero variety and it's done so many great things and it's been so impactful. Um, but it also set yield records for growers. A really awesome producer here in Colorado. But there's just one thing about it, which was as the fact that it was so sweet in the maltings and the brewing and distilling also is because it has a slightly lower protein profile, than a lot of the other wheats that they had produced for the flour mills. And so because of that, it didn't make big, fluffy, brilliant loaves of bread. And so it was a variety that was actually going to get completely phased out of production, despite the fact that it was a huge win for agronomically, but also a huge win for this part of the niche market that at the time, Colorado Wheat Growers Association wasn't really paying attention to and didn't see necessarily the potential of of opportunities in the brewing and distilling specialty and craft brewing and distilling world. And so we were actually able to save this variety from extinction, from just being tossed aside. And it's a miracle that we were, just because of, like I said, everything that it brings to the table on both sides of the supply chain. Um, is really something remarkable. So we were able to save this variety, which is a huge win for farms and a huge win for maltsters, brewers, and distillers. And in de facto, kind of ending up with a with a almost private's not necessarily the right word. I'm missing some words today because I was out at the malt house till 3 a.m. last night. But um, we kind of had our own unique variety of wheat that nobody else had because everybody else threw it away. Um, so, and it's not anything that we're trying to keep to our chest or keep as a secret or whatnot. We've told Mark that if other buyers come along and want to use it, as long as they're giving you a fair price that you're happy with, then we have no problems with that. We're not going to hold anybody's feet to the fire in that way. I mean, our goal is to expand these possibilities, and if it's something that a lot of people can use in different ways, then more power to it. But um, we're certainly happy to have kind of stumbled across this, and so much of our story is kind of just right place and right time. Um, just even founding the company in the first place, and access to barley varieties as well, and everything that's kind of happened to us. I mean, I think kind of what I was saying right before we kind of came online, um, that opportunities and potential, and all these things are latent and not intrinsic. None of these things just happen. Is You have to really put yourself in the right position for things to happen. And I think that's true in terms of your craft to begin with. I'll just reiterate what I had said, and we can maybe talk about that a little bit further down the line, the brewery I was talking about. But I was really kind of trying to hit home the idea of, you know, that I hear a lot of craftspeople who are coming from a really, pure and humble place, trying to talk about how much they respect ingredients by saying, I'm sorry, I just see in the chat here, I'm talking about the Antero variety. The Antero variety was the lost variety. Um, is a question that came up in the chat. Um, but I hear a lot of craftspeople talk about how they're just trying to step out of the way of the ingredients and let the ingredients speak for themselves. And I know that that comes from a place of respect and trying to show respect to the ingredients. But I think if you, as a craftsperson, if you take yourself out of the equation, then you're really doing yourself a disservice, and you're ultimately doing a disservice to the ingredients as well. It's really important to, you know, embrace that you are doing something special, to these things. Though, like I said before, these are latent qualities or characteristics, and not intrinsic qualities or characteristics. They have to be unlocked by somebody, and so I think it's important to embrace being the person who unlocks that. And I think that you can do that without disrespecting the ingredient, and really showcasing, everything that's special about the ingredient, and also the fact that there's more than one thing that you can do with any specific ingredient. If that wheat could only be one thing and one thing alone, then it would definitely be bigger news than what it is now. But the fact that it can be so many different things, is really remarkable. Um, and this other question that came up in the chat here is the name of the Czech brewery. Yeah, at the front end of when people were just kind of trickling in, I was talking about a new brewery here in Colorado, brewing all Czech style lagers. It's called Cohesion Brewing. It's in Denver, North Denver, around 39th and York, in the old Lowry admin kind of complex over there. It's a beautiful space, but it was a really cool kind of collaboration between the malt house and the brewer, in that they came to us early on like years ago, when they were first starting to just conceptualize what the brewery was going to be, and what that they were going to do these Czech style lagers. But one of the things that they wanted to embrace about it was, um, utilizing local ingredients. And that's one of the things that make those beers so special in the Czech Republic, is the fact that they're using raw materials that were grown right there. And so it tastes like right there. It doesn't taste like it could be made anywhere else. And so Eric and Lisa at Cohesion wanted to embrace the style, but embrace that style fully in the idea of these are beers, these are Czech inspired beers, but beers that couldn't be brewed anywhere else, and utilizing these local ingredients. So we've worked hand in glove with them in developing special malts that have elements of what you might find in Czech style lagers, while still kind of really highlighting what we can do with grains from here in Colorado.
Hey,
Now
Christopher,
yeah.
I did have a question that was texted to me, that was asking a little bit about the you mentioned proteins and the importance of proteins, both pro protein and con protein. Wondering what that means for brewers and distillers. So would you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, if a grain has, whether it be barley or wheat or any other grain, there are specific grains that brewers use that do include higher protein. And wheat is generally one of them. Like I said, it's being used for head retention and mouthfeel. So those are both things that are derived from the proteins. But if those proteins are too long of chains and can't be broken down in the malting process, then you don't gain access to the sugar within that grain. And so you won't also pull out the sweetness to it. And so that's what I was kind of referring to in terms of a lot of those other varieties kind of tasting like pasta water, because we never really we weren't able to break down the proteins enough to be able to access the starches and convert them into sugars. So
right,
a lot like much higher proteins, they'd actually do what you want them to do in the beer, but you'd also have this really kind of flat, doughy flavor rather than the sweetness. So you want the protein matrices to be able to give you that weight on the palate, as well as help create that foam. But you also want sweetness present as well within those beverages. And I would say specifically, that's specifically to brewing. I think those flavor make the actual flavor attributes, and that unlocking the sweetness is something I think that comes out a lot more clearly in the distillate. And that is one of the things in working with Dryland on both the Sonora and the Antero Wheat whiskeys. It was really, really exciting to be able to see these whiskeys side by side, because as I said, analytically, their proteins were fairly similar. A lot of the criteria for them looked fairly similar on the back end, but what they produced in the spirit had really clear, clean distinctions.
yeah.
And the sweetness, that's one of the things that really caught me about the wheat whiskey when we first tasted it from Dryland in both the Sonora and the Antero is, generally when I'm drinking whiskey, I'm thinking of complexity and depth and whatnot because of the barrel aging. But one thing that I think really stood out in the Dryland wheat whiskeys was the flavor of the grain itself really showing through. And the way it showed through was, in both instances, they have this almost like cake batter or cake frosting kind of sweetness that comes through. And it's a really soft sweetness that allows for the vanillins of the barrel aging to stand out, but in a way that wasn't like dense and layered with like rough flavors like tobacco or leather or chocolate, like a lot of whiskeys are. It was really clean, and more of those kind of cherry flavors came out with the cake batter kind of flavors. And it was a really neat, soft sipping whiskey that had a lot of nuance to it without being dense and um, complex. There was
Yeah.
a beautiful kind of simplicity to it, and maybe you can speak a little bit more to that, Nels.
Well, for sure. And I think this is actually a key on why this Antero has been such a phenomenal project for us as well, because as a general rule, we look at when we were trying to experiment with our recipes and using different grains, we were finding that a lot of the modern wheats, we were certainly looking for the right wheat for the rare single grain wheat whiskeys. A lot of them were easy to work with, meaning that they were you know, our modern yeasts were designed
Efficient.
for them. Yeah, but they just didn't give us the right output. And so what we found fascinating is with the Antero wheat and particularly the White Sonora wheat, when you compare them side by side, their profiles, their lab analysis looks quite similar, but yet even in the fermentation, they behave so differently to a point where the Antero is a lot easier to work with, but we did have to actually take one of the yeast strains that we had designed to work with the White Sonora and really kind of tailor that to the Antero itself. But what we found is that everything from the enzyme levels to the slight differences in proteins have a huge impact on how we actually what our process is for unlocking that grain. And I appreciate, Christopher, what you're saying around it does take the art and the skill of the makers to actually bring out the best of each grain, because the Antero and the White Sonora that we both use for our whiskeys, while in principle they're roughly the same on terms of lab analysis, and you'd think that they would be treated the same in our process, but they actually there's some fundamental differences in what we had to do to our process to be able to unlock those characteristics of each grain. And I think that is really where the dials do have an opportunity for us to turn those dials, pull those knobs to really tailor. The maker can tailor the process and tailor the experience that like Cohesion is doing with their beer in order to get the most advantage or get what you want out of those local grains. It is not a one size fits all, not at all.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, as we all know, as I'm sure most people on this call will attest to, in whatever field you're in, and like I was context, which was, developing a totally homogeneous flat product where nobody, especially the producers, making any money, growing it. Um, and and the story of, industrial agriculture, just, pushing character out of it and just pushing up volume and, quote unquote efficiency, which is just speed and how fast can we make this. Whereas the real power of craft is that we can take our time and we can pay attention, and we're doing it in small enough batches where we can adjust our processes to get the best out of something. And I think that's one of the main opportunities, I think, in craft malting that craft malting presents. I think, that the better opportunity for transparency and fair, equitable pricing is a huge part of it. And I think being able to then, along the lines of transparency, being able to utilize locally grown raw materials is a huge part of it. Looking at using heirloom varieties and heritage varieties and things like that, obviously, is a huge value add. But I really do think that one of the biggest value adds is small batch production, which then allows you to adjust your processes to really unlock potential of things that have been traditionally overlooked or even thrown out, despite the fact that they're really great, agronomically sound cereals. And so, yeah, if you're making 500,000 pounds of malt at a time, you need a very specific, tight, narrow spec on that, because you can't adjust that process to produce, a malt that's going to be predictable, making 500,000 pounds of it at a time, if one of those things is slightly out of that narrow spec that you designed. But we can work with high protein barleys or wheats, higher protein barleys and wheats, and manipulate our germination temperatures at different times of germination, like pushing the temperatures at the front of germination to create more active protein breakdown at the very beginning, and then slow down bring the temperature down and slow it down, and stretch that time out to preserve the enzyme while we're still breaking down those proteins. And so that agility that comes with small batch is really unlocking things that haven't been unlocked in a really long time. Um, uh, or unlocking things that have never been unlocked before. I think that's something that almost gets lost sometimes, and how excited we are in looking back at things and embracing heritage or heirloom or traditional methodologies and small batch methodologies of doing things is recreating something that once was, which I think has, romance and power to it. But I think we at the same time need to be looking forward at creating what hasn't ever been, in the exact same breath, because that's what's going to keep bringing people back to it, and getting people to change their ideas of it. Like a Pilsner style beer in general, or those light Czech lagers, you know, up to this point, Pilsner malts have largely been considered to be, oh, that's just your lightest kiln malt, so it should be pretty plain and not that exciting. It's the most basic kind of um, light malt that you can make without having any off flavors in it. Whereas, if anything, that malt represents the best, greatest potential for creating something similar to fresh crop as you can have in that specific product. Your Pilsner style lager might taste different every single year. Um, you know, not drastically, but we can embrace those changes of the crop year, and what, when we got rain, when we were dry, when things cured in the field, and all those, and did we have slightly higher proteins, um, and whatnot, and or did we have higher water sensitivity, and so that changed what we did in the malt house, which then may mean that we have to have even longer germinations, which means that different flavors kind of developed. There's this really cool opportunity to now create a sense of, oh, this crop this year had this to it, which we never saw before, or we may never see again, rather than everything just being static. We're working with growing organic material. Like, we should embrace how dynamic that really could be.
Hey, Christopher, do you mind if we have a couple of questions coming in? And apologies, I have a couple of emails that say, hey, they can't get questions going through chat. So I don't.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what's. So I've got a few questions from email and one via text, if that's all right, folks. So we'll cover those off. One of the questions, Christopher, we got is, can Troubadour do custom malting? And if so, what are your minimum quantities?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to mention right out of the gate, I know, Nels was kind of telling the story about hounding us down. And the only reason why we weren't as super responsive out of the gate was because we only had one malting system, and we had already kind of maxed out what we were doing. And we were trying to work towards that capacity. But our number one goal was that opportunity of doing much more custom malting, working with small producers and whatnot. So we've been able to work with specific farms um, who have their own relationships with brewers or distillers to malt their product for them, which then they were able to distribute those malts, or do projects like the Sonora with dryland. So we do custom malting. It is something that we've built ourselves to be able to do. Right now, our minimum quantities is we need to go into the malt house with 3 tons of the raw material, but we are in the process of building a pilot system right now, which will be a 500 pound to 1,000 or half ton capacity, because we're actually are working on a Kernza project with Stodgy Brewing here in Fort Collins. So we're going to be we're planting some Kernza this year, and we will start malting that after the first run next year. So that will be really exciting.
Yeah, Christopher, I want some of that too, by the way.
Yeah,
Turns on our list.
absolutely.
Another question that came through: are there any grain varieties that you, being Troubadour, are looking for from Colorado growers right
now? So one of the things is, out of the gate, kind of taking the coffee model, I wanted to work with as many different, since we're not growers ourselves, we wanted to contract with as many different farmers as possible. And so we kind of spread out rather thinly, honestly, with our barley production. We had multiple growers, and we were paying a premium for it, but they were also doing pretty small acreage at the time. And then the other kind of impact was that in relation to FSMA and Food Safety Modernization Act, traceability, we were doing all of our barley storage was with one of our growers. So if we were to trace something back to the silo, we wouldn't be able to trace it back specifically to the growers, since the growers were all sharing the same silo. So we simplified things. So now we're working with one grower on Genie barley, LCS Genie barley. And I can talk a little bit more about that variety. It's been a game changer in craft malting, and all the Lima grain variety across the board have been really, Lima grain barley varieties have been um, incredible for craft malting. Um, and then we do the Antero Wheat with Arnish Farms, and then we're working with Whiskey Sisters Group out of Burlington, Colorado, on oats and rye and whatnot. But we are, so our goal is, as we look at different varieties, we can work with different growers on those kind of things. So we would work with a specific grower on a specific variety or a specific cereal product. Um, so there's nothing at the moment that we're looking to fill contract, because we're still kind of building up those relationships and those volumes with our current growers to make sure that that's something sustainable for them to be a part of.
Well, and kind of related to this, and this is my question now. Um, as you look at, because you're planning as a malter, working with the growers, you're planning years out even. Do you see anything or any other grains on the horizon, or Kernza is one of them that you've mentioned, that brewers and distillers, very selfishly here, I'm looking at the brewer and distiller world, that we should start looking at or paying attention to? Anything that you see that we should maybe explore now that might be, hitting the tanks here in 2 to 3 years?
Spelt is something that we've had some interest in, and I know that there's been some groups that have been working on spelt. I know there's a group, not Colorado, but just up in Wyoming, out of the university there, that has been working on a big spelt project. Triticale is something that a number of growers have already had in production, but it's something that I've had a number of brewers who are looking for either spelt or rye or some of these things, and I've tried to encourage them to give triticale a chance, but it's something just that they're not used to seeing, and so, but I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and I feel like I've seen a couple triticale spirits out there as well.
Very good, very good. And what about the possibility, if somebody is a home brewer, is there any way they can get any of your specialty malts in smaller quantities?
We're currently working with Stodgy Brewing here in Fort Collins. They're going to host kind of a home brew, some prepackaged home brew materials for us. We're strictly wholesale, and we're just a 2-person operation, so we just don't really have the bandwidth to do retail operations as well. So we were working for a long time with Elevated Fermentations in Loveland, and they're a really great group of folks. Really focusing on Colorado grown raw materials, and yeast strains from Colorado yeast propagators. But they closed down last year, along with every other homebrew shop. So, but Stodgy has been really interested. They already kind of sell some other products from other companies in town, like food products and whatnot. And we thought we could actually utilize that model to sell them, grains wholesale that they can then sell in prepackaged homebrew amounts. So we're looking forward to doing that here in the near future. And we're playing around with how we want to handle some of the specialty malts, because that's one of our keys is our specialties. One of the things that got me excited about malting as a roaster was looking at dark malts and realizing that nobody had considered the impact of freshness on those at any point in their production, and it's something that makes, especially on dark roasted malts, um, you freshness is integral to the quality of those. It's really, really important. And so I'd rather not have a pile of, dark roasted malts just sitting at Stagio waiting to be bought. I think we're going to set up some kind of like sign up sheet or something like that, so we can ensure that even home brewers are getting um, the freshest specialties as possible.
Well, and if anybody does need some Antero, malted Antero or malted White Sonora, um, we can have some extra on stock. We get it pretty regularly. So we come on into Longmont, grab a drink and grab some malt. Why not? So
There you go.
To that end, we actually have a few recipes, including one for that Andy's got for a bread that uses different specialty malted grains in it. So we'll try to get that out to the group here in the next week or so. I know that there was some interest as well on, can you use malted grains in baking? So that's something we'll share some information if we can. And Christopher, I'm looking at time. I know we're just about on the hour. I just wanted to jump in and see if there are any other questions or comments that anyone has that we can actually cover here in the last minute or so. I know that there's a range of questions that are outstanding that I think I saw some free email, so we will send that through. Make sure we follow up on those.
Okay. Yeah, and I would just, kind of to hit the point home. And I would imagine that most, like I said earlier, most people on this call are already invested in all of this. But, for so long, agriculture around cereals has been, like I said, about volume and efficiency and whatnot, and really trying to embrace bringing character back to. That's another little twist on our Troubadour name is we like to make character driven malts to make the story of whatever it is that you're making much more exciting and engaging. I think when you're focused on creating flavor, it just opens those pathways to conversation, which I think is the strongest thing. There's so many different things that we do quality control wise and better understanding our processes and our product and whatnot. But the number one thing is really fostering this full feedback loop that everybody in the supply chain is talking to each other, rather than somebody at the end user side of it is just, hitting a button from a warehouse and something's landing and it's, there's no connection to anybody in the process. And I think it's really the antithesis of making a craft anything. Like I just feel that, kind of along the lines of the story I was telling about, we wanted to create a situation where if somebody went in and they saw a coffee beer on the tap list, that they would ask, where did the coffee come from? Because it was something important to them. I think we'd love to see that really happen with malts in beers and spirits. Like, where did your raw materials come from? If you're paying a premium price for a craft cocktail or a craft beer, you go to some of these places and it's $7 for a glass of beer, or $15 for a craft cocktail, and that person behind the bar can tell you the story of where that came from. You're going to feel really good, paying that price for that, because that everybody involved in that really cared about it, and that it's worth that for a reason. It's worth that price for a reason, versus going into one of those places and they're charging you that price and you ask them, where did the grain come from, or how did you make this? And they just kind of shrug and they can't tell you. Why would you keep paying that premium price for something that they've demonstrated that they're not paying that much attention to? So I think really we're kind of on the precipice of creating this new category within the craft world, the craft spirits and beer world. I think within baking, there's these connections have been existing for some time, and are opening up even further now. But it's really exciting, and I think the biggest thing, again, going back to my coffee background, is I didn't start malting to get out of coffee, because I loved coffee and I have friends all over the world because of it. I got into this because I saw an opportunity to extend the conversations we were having in coffee into somewhere else. And I thought that it was really important that we continue to extend those conversations further and further and further and bring more people to the table of those conversations and not get caught up in our own little echo chambers of everybody just agreeing with each other about what should be important and what's unique about these things, but really challenging ourselves and stepping outside of our own little echo chamber and learning new aspects of it that continue to help us all grow. So
Hey, Christopher, so one last question, and we're on the hour here, but I think it is a good question. Where can I buy Antero wheat berries to grow in small trial quantities? Do you have any links for seed stock?
Certified seed stock would be through Arnish
Okay,
Farms.
through Mark. Okay, and we can. In fact, we'll Mark Arnish Farms. Christy, if you want to reach out to me directly, I can get you in contact with Mark, and we can do the grain chain thing and connect you to. And I think we are on the hour. I'm sensitive to everyone's time. I know the Malt House is operating today. I have got some people tapping me on the shoulder saying, "Can you please come and check the still?" So to that note, I just wanted to remind folks that please send out to any of your networks links to the grain chain, links to these videos. We certainly appreciate as an organization the opportunity to grow, and that takes great members on all sides: consumers, growers, producers, you name it. So I encourage everybody to share anything about the Colorado grain chain in this session on social media, and we will sign off. And thanks, Christopher. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Take good care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.